For a week straight, Guardsman Thomas Hale was the laughingstock of his squad, the man who tripped, faltered, and earned the mocking nickname the Tourist. But what no one realized was that behind his stumbles lay a secret, a discipline, so sharp it could cut through steel. And when his commander uttered a single code word, Grey Watch, everything changed. Picture, if you will, the Scottish Highlands in late autumn. The mist clings to the heather like the spirits of ancient warriors, and the wind carries stories of battles fought and won by men whose names have been forgotten by history. It was here, in this sacred land, that the Ministry of Defence conducted what they coldly called operational readiness evaluations. We called it something else entirely. We called it hell. A deep sigh, as if remembering Piney was there as an observer. That week, sent by Whitehall to assess the programme's effectiveness, what I found was 30 young men being systematically broken down, their spirits ground against the millstone of military precision until only the hardest grain remained. Among them was Thomas Hale, 23 years old, with the kind of face that disappeared in crowds, unremarkable in every way that mattered to the casual observer. His uniform was always immaculate, his posture perfect, but there was something diminished about him, as if he were trying very hard to be invisible. The other soldiers, led by a cocksure corporal named Davis, had already marked him as prey. The Tourist, they called him, and the name stuck like mud on Sunday shoes. You see, in the brutal mathematics of military training, there must always be a scapegoat, someone upon whom the others can project their own fears of failure. But I had lived long enough to recognize something the young ones missed. There was a quality to Hale's movements, a precision that went beyond mere drill instruction. When he cleaned his weapon, his hands moved with the fluid certainty of a man who had done this in darkness, under pressure, when his life depended on it. When he walked, his eyes swept the environment in patterns too systematic to be casual observation. The boy was hiding something. The question was what and why. Day after day, I watched this curious performance unfold. Hale would stumble where others succeeded, lag where others excelled. In the physical trials, he would start strong, his form was impeccable, his breathing controlled, but then something would change. A deliberate clumsiness would creep into his movements, as if he were remembering to be ordinary. But the eyes, child, the eyes never lie, no matter how skilled the actor, and Thomas Hale's eyes held depths that troubled me. They were the eyes of a man who had seen things, done things, that left marks on the soul. During a navigation exercise through the Highland mist, I watched from a ridge with field glasses. While others stumbled through bogs and took wrong turns, Hale moved with eerie certainty through that grey world. He never consulted his compass, navigating by reading subtle signs, moss on stone, water flow patterns, wind-bent grass, skills not taught to ceremonial guards, but to men who had moved through hostile territory where a wrong turn meant death. Yet at each checkpoint, he would deliberately linger, frown at his map with theatrical confusion, even backtrack. By exercise's end, he finished middle of the pack and remarkable. During weapons training, while the others fumbled with their rifles in blind haste, Hale's fingers would dance across the components with unconscious grace. But then, and this is where it became fascinating, he would deliberately slow down, make small errors, ensure he finished last. It was a performance of such subtle artistry that even the post instructors missed it. During a malfunctioned drill, Corporal Davis's rifle jammed, a complex failure that left him staring helplessly. While the instructor berated him, I noticed Hale's hands moving slightly, unconsciously mimicking the exact sequence to clear that jam. He knew, but he caught himself, forced that knowledge back into whatever corner of his mind it had emerged from. That night in the barracks, while most soldiers collapsed, exhausted, and Davis's circle played cards, Hale sat cleaning equipment that was already spotless. Each movement was meditation, each action maintaining connection to something deeper than his daily facade. His boots weren't just clean, they were maintained with obsessive care of a man whose life had once depended on such details. Commander Mason, however, was no ordinary instructor, a veteran of conflicts the ministry preferred not to name. He possessed what we old soldiers call the sight, the ability to see past surface appearances to the truth beneath. I watched him study Hale with the intensity of a hawk, observing a mouse that might not be quite what it seemed. Mason began to test him, though so subtly that even I almost missed it. During physical training, he would call out unexpected orders, changes in direction, modifications to the exercise, and watch how quickly the soldiers adapted. Most showed confusion, delay, the natural human response to the unexpected. But Hale's body would begin responding before the order was complete, as if some deeper part of him was always listening, always ready. The tactical simulations, where Hale's deception became most apparent to my trained eye, while others rushed through doorways with reckless bravado, Hale would pause just a fraction of a second at each threshold. The instructor saw hesitation, fear. I saw something else entirely. In that brief pause, his eyes would photograph the entire room beyond, positions, angles, threats, cover. He was processing information at a level that suggested training far beyond what any ceremonial guardsman should possess. I remember one simulation, a hostage rescue in a mock building. Davis charged through like a bull, triggering cascading complications. What should have been surgical became a bloodbath. Others attempted their approaches too cautious or reckless. Then Hale's turn. He studied the entrance with troubled intensity, while seconds ticked away. But I watched his eyes, not confusion or fear, but computation. He was calculating probabilities, seeing the entire engagement before it began. What followed was controlled perfection. He flowed through the building like smoke, each shot precisely placed, each step calculated. He cleared the structure with supernatural efficiency. Then, at the final room, he stumbled, not physically, but something changed in his expression. He hesitated, allowing seconds to slip away. His movements became clumsy, shots delayed. He completed the exercise barely, with a poor time, a long, meaningful pause. The instructors noted his poor performance, with disappointed shakes of their heads. His squadmates smirked and whispered, "But Commander Mason." Mason's eyes never left Hale's face, and in those weathered features, I saw recognition dawning like sunrise over a battlefield. But he was too good at hiding it. So good that even I began to wonder if I was imagining patterns where none existed. Perhaps he truly was just a confused young man, overwhelmed by demands beyond his capability. Perhaps the man I thought I glimpsed in those brief moments was merely the product of an old soldier's wishful thinking. The voice becomes heavy with anticipation. Then came the final test. The narrator's voice drops to barely above a whisper. The final evaluation was designed by devils. I'm convinced of it. A live-fire assault course that would have challenged seasoned commandos, set in the skeletal remains of an abandoned village. Smoke machines shrouded everything in grey confusion. Speakers blasted the sounds of battle, and targets both hostile and civilian popped up from shadows and doorways with malicious randomness. One by one, the young soldiers attempted the course. Davis, despite his swagger, made fatal errors in his haste. Others were too cautious, missing time limits. Each failure carved another line of despair into their faces. The weight of potential disgrace hung over them all like storm clouds. A long pause, filled with the weight of memory. Then came Hale's turn. As he walked to the starting line, the mockery from his squad was audible across the range. "Don't get lost, tourist. Remember to smile for the cameras. The cruelty of youth knows no bounds, child." They sensed weakness and circled like wolves. He stood at the line, pale and trembling, or so it seemed. But I was watching carefully now, and what I saw was a man fighting an internal battle of enormous proportions. His breathing was controlled, his stance perfect, but there was something almost frantic in his eyes, as if he were wrestling with some invisible demon. The whistle blew. He moved forward, and immediately the pattern repeated. Hesitation, clumsiness, failure. A target appeared. His shot was delayed, inaccurate. The mocking groans from the observation area grew louder. Another tourist performance was unfolding exactly as expected. But Commander Mason... Mason was watching something else entirely. I saw him lean forward, his weathered face creased with concentration. Whatever he was seeing, it was not what the others saw. The narrator's voice builds with tension. That's when Mason did something unprecedented. He grabbed the range microphone and spoke a single word into the crackling speaker system. "Grey Watch." The voice becomes almost reverent. "What happened next, child? I will remember until my dying breath." It was as if lightning had struck that young man's soul and illuminated something that had been hidden in darkness for too long. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The trembling stopped. The uncertain posture snapped into perfect alignment. The confused, overwhelmed expression vanished from his face, replaced by something that made my old soldier's heart skip a beat. Those eyes, those deceptively ordinary eyes, became twin flames of focused intensity. Greywatch was no ordinary word. It was a key that unlocked a door that had been sealed tight, and through that door stepped not Thomas Hale the tourist, but Thomas Hale the ... something else entirely. The narrator pauses, searching for words. He moved like water flowing downhill, inevitable, fluid, perfectly efficient. His weapon became an extension of his will. Targets that had been missed or wounded by others were engaged with surgical precision. The hesitation at doorways transformed into tactical brilliance. He was reading the environment like a master musician reading sheet music. The mocking voices fell silent. Then, one by one, they began to whisper different words. Words like impossible, and how, and what is he? Through the container maze where others had stumbled and doubled back, Hale moved with supernatural certainty. He anticipated threats before they materialized, engaged targets that hadn't yet appeared in their designated positions. It was as if he could see through time itself. The voice grows hushed with awe. The final challenge was a hostage scenario, an impossibly difficult shot that required separating a terrorist target from a civilian silhouette with only inches of clearance. Davis had refused to even attempt it. Others had shot the hostage by mistake. It was designed to be the ultimate test of nerve and skill. Hale didn't even seem to aim. He raised his rifle in one smooth motion, fired once, and the terrorist target fell backward, while the civilian remained untouched. The silence that followed was the kind that accompanies miracles. Perfect score, record time, 0 casualties. The tourist had vanished completely. In his place stood something magnificent and terrible, a weapon, disguised as a man. A predator who had spent a week pretending to be prey. The narrator's voice becomes conspiratorial. Later that evening, in Mason's austere office, I witnessed a conversation that officially never happened. Hale stood before the commander's desk, and for the first time since I'd been observing him, he looked ... complete, as if missing pieces of himself had suddenly clicked back into place. Mason's office was a study in controlled precision. Maps of forgotten conflicts covered one wall. Medals that would never be displayed filled the cabinet. The air smelled of leather, gun oil, and secrets. Mason gestured to a chair, but Hale remained standing. Your file makes interesting reading, guardsman, or should I say, agent. Silence stretched between them. Mason continued, pulling a classified folder from his drawer. 2 years of deep cover work, close protection operations in places the government pretends don't exist. They trained you to be invisible, didn't they? He opened the folder. Agent Thomas Hale, seconded to Operation Greywatch, January 2019. Sniper rated, demolitions expert, advanced combat instructor. The list continued down to terrorism operations, counterintelligence work, protection details for classified assets. The psychological conditioning was extensive. Mason continued, his weathered face creased with something that might have been sympathy. They needed operatives who could disappear completely into their cover identities. Men and women who could suppress their true capabilities so thoroughly that they would pass any scrutiny, any test, any investigation. The perfect sleeper agency. Looked up from the file, meeting Hale's eyes directly. But there were side effects, weren't there? The conditioning was so complete that some operatives lost access to their own abilities. They became so skilled at pretending to be ordinary that they forgot they were extraordinary. A long pause, filled with understanding, and there it was, the truth that explained everything. Greywatch wasn't just a special unit, it was a shadow program that created human chameleons, men and women trained to disappear into the background until the moment they needed to become something else entirely. Hale had been so thoroughly conditioned to suppress his true abilities that he'd almost lost access to them completely, but the conditioning had been too successful. When his assignment ended and he was returned to conventional military service, the psychological blocks remained in place. He knew he possessed skills, could sense capabilities lurking just beyond reach, but couldn't access them. Like a master pianist with his hands bound, he could hear the music, but couldn't play the notes. The trigger phrase was a failsafe, Mason explained, though Hale already knew this, a way to bypass the psychological barriers in case of emergency. Greywatch was more than a unit designation, it was a key to unlock what had been deliberately hidden. The narrator's voice becomes almost reverentially. Watched Hale's face as Mason spoke. Saw the weight of recognition settling on his features like snow on mountain peaks. For 2 years, he had been Thomas Hale, the confused guardsman, struggling with tasks that should have been second nature, failing at exercises that were elementary compared to the operations he had once conducted with lethal precision. The irony was exquisite and terrible. The very training that had made him invaluable as a deep cover operative had nearly destroyed him as a conventional soldier. He had been taught to hide his light under such an impenetrable bushel that he had nearly forgotten it existed at all. Your psychological profile, Mason continued, consulting another section of the file, shows classic symptoms of identity fragmentation. The therapists called it operational displacement syndrome. You had become so skilled at being someone else that you lost touch with who you really were. But Mason wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a tone that carried decades of command authority. What troubles me, Agent, is why you're here at all. Men with your qualifications don't typically find themselves assigned to ceremonial duties. Men with your clearance level don't usually slip through the cracks. The tension in the room becomes palpable. It was then that I understood the true complexity of the situation. This wasn't simply a case of a confused soldier finding his way back to competence. This was something far more labyrinthine, a man whose very presence in the ceremonial guard raised questions that reached into the shadowy corners of state security. Hale remained silent, but his posture spoke volumes. He stood, not at military attention, but in what specialists call ready position, balanced, alert, prepared to move in any direction at a moment's notice. Whatever had brought him to this Highland training ground, it wasn't merely administrative oversight. Mason seemed to sense this as well. He closed the file and fixed Hale with a stare that could have cut glass. There are only two reasons a Grey Watch operative ends up in ceremonial duty, he said slowly. Either you're being punished for something, or you're being positioned for something. Given your record, I'm inclined to believe it's the latter. The voice becomes conspiratorial. The implications hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. Heavy, mystical, transformative. Was Hale's assignment to the Royal Guard truly the result of bureaucratic shuffling, or was it something more deliberate? In the world of intelligence operations, coincidences were rare and usually dangerous. Mason slid a duty roster across the desk. Hale's name was now at the top, marked for the most sensitive postings. Tomorrow you return to London, Mason said. You'll stand your post at the palace, and everyone will see exactly what they expect to see. Another ceremonial guard, pretty and useless. But I'll know better. And more importantly, you'll know better. He paused, studying Hale's face with the intensity of a man reading tactical maps. Whatever brought you to my attention this week, whatever purpose your superiors have in mind, remember this: the crown doesn't need ceremony half as much as it needs protection. The tourists see the pageantry. I need you to see the threats. The narrator's voice grows heavy with implication. As I left that office, slipping away into the Highland night, I carried with me the weight of secrets that would burden me for years to come. I had witnessed not just the resurrection of a soldier's confidence, but the careful positioning of a chess piece in a game whose scope I could only begin to imagine. The boy who had stumbled through a week of training was gone forever. In his place stood a man who had remembered not just his skills, but his purpose. And that purpose, I suspected, extended far beyond the ceremonial duties that would camouflage his true mission. A knowing pause. But that, child, is a story for another evening by another fire. For now, let me tell you what became of the tourist when he returned to his post in London. The narrator's voice grows reflective, philosophically. A week later, I found myself standing among the tourists outside Buckingham Palace on a brilliant summer morning. The crowds pressed against the barriers, cameras clicking, children pointing at the motionless figures in their scarlet tunics and towering bearskin hats. There he was, Thomas Hale, standing at his post, with the perfect stillness that tourists expected. His eyes stared straight ahead, unseeing, unblinking. He was the very picture of ceremonial emptiness, a living statue dressed in the pageantry of tradition. But I knew better. I had learned to see past the performance. The voice drops to an almost mystical whisper. Let me tell you what I observed during those first weeks after his return. Child, things that no official report would ever record. Moments that existed only in the space between heartbeats. There was a morning when a street performer, a juggler with too many scarves and too loud a voice, positioned himself directly in front of Hale's post. The man was drawing crowds, creating the kind of distraction that makes security professionals nervous. For 20 minutes, he threw his props higher and higher. each toss bringing them dangerously close to the guard's immobile form. The tourists laughed and applauded, delighted by the seeming obliviousness of the ceremonial soldier who stood perfectly still as colored silk fluttered inches from his face. They saw comedy. I saw something else entirely. The narrator pauses, building tension. I watched Hale's eyes, and though they never moved from their fixed forward stare, I could sense the cataloguing taking place behind them. Every toss was tracked, every trajectory calculated. When one scar finally drifted close enough to brush against his bare skin, his head moved. Not a flinch, not a reaction to contact, but a microscopic adjustment that sent the silk harmlessly to one side. The movement was so subtle that even I nearly missed it. The tourists certainly saw nothing. But that performer knew something had happened. His pattern faltered for just an instant, his eyes flickering to the guard's face with an expression that might have been recognition or fear. He packed up his act within minutes and moved on. The voice becomes more contemplative. Or consider the incident with the suspicious package, a briefcase, abandoned near the palace gates during the busy afternoon shift change. Protocol demanded that it be treated as a potential threat until proven otherwise. But bureaucratic wheels turn slowly, even in security matters. I watched the response unfold from a coffee shop across the street, nursing a cup that had long since grown cold. The duty sergeant was making calls, consulting procedures, organizing a perimeter. Standard operating procedure called for evacuation of the immediate area. Bomb disposal experts. The full theatrical display of modern security. But while all this official activity was taking place, I noticed that Hale had subtly adjusted his position. Not enough to break ceremonial protocol, not enough for the tourists to notice, but enough to establish a clear line of sight to the suspicious briefcase. His angle of vision, I realized, would allow him to observe not just the package itself but anyone who might approach it. A knowing chuckle when the bomb squad finally arrived. They discovered that the briefcase contained nothing more threatening than someone's forgotten lunch and a collection of tourist pamphlets. But for 40 minutes, while official security scrambled to respond, Hale had maintained quiet overwatch on a potential threat, not because he had been ordered to, not because it was part of his ceremonial duties, but because his true nature could not be completely suppressed, even by the most sophisticated conditioning. Watch his eyes, child. When you encounter such men in your life, look beyond the surface calm to the depths beneath. For in those depths, I saw the constant, rhythmic scanning of a predator assessing its environment. Every face in the crowd was catalogued, every movement analyzed, every potential threat evaluated and dismissed or marked for further observation. The voice grows, more intense, but it was the incident with the lost child that truly revealed the man behind the mask. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, had wandered away from her parents in the crush of tourists. She found herself alone and terrified in front of the palace gates, surrounded by strangers speaking languages she didn't understand. The child began to cry, that particular wail of a lost soul that cuts through the heart like a blade. The crowd around her grew uncomfortable, unsure how to respond. Her parents were nowhere to be seen, presumably searching for her elsewhere in the vast square. Hale stood motionless at his post, eyes fixed forward, expression unchanging. To all appearances, he was oblivious to the distress unfolding mere feet from his position. The ceremonial guard, bound by protocol, could not break character to comfort a crying child. A long pause, heavy with emotion, but I was watching more carefully than the casual observers. I saw the almost imperceptible shift in his stance, the way his body angled slightly toward the child without appearing to move. I saw his eyes, still staring straight ahead, tracking the movement of adults in his peripheral vision, assessing, evaluating, determining which among them might be the missing parents, and then, without moving his head, without breaking the rigid discipline of his ceremonial pose, he did something remarkable. He began to whistle, softly, almost inaudibly, but with perfect pitch and timing. It was a simple tune, a children's lullaby that transcended language barriers. The effect was magical. The little girl's sobs gradually quieted as the gentle melody reached her ears. She looked around, confused but comforted, trying to locate the source of the sound. Other tourists began to notice, their attention drawn to the mysterious music that seemed to come from nowhere. The narrator's voice becomes tender within minutes. The commotion had attracted exactly the right kind of attention. A police constable approached, then a palace security officer. The expanded search grid quickly located the frantic parents, and the reunion was tearful and joyous. Through it all, Hale maintained his perfect stillness, his eyes never wavering from their forward stare. No one could prove he had done anything. No one could even be certain where the whistling had come from. But I knew. And somewhere in the crowd, a 5-year-old girl would carry with her forever the memory of a moment when she was afraid and alone, and guardian angel in a red coat sang her to safety. The voice drops to barely above a whispery. Large man in a heavy coat pushed too close to the barriers. The same suspicious individual I had noticed on previous visits, always present during shift changes, always watching, always testing boundaries. For just an instant, a fraction of a second that most would miss, I saw Hale's finger tense against his rifle's trigger guard. The man moved away, distracted by his wife's call. The finger relaxed, but something else happened in that moment. The suspicious man's eyes met Hale's reflected gaze in the brass fittings of the palace gates. Just a flicker, just a glimpse, but enough. The recognition passed between them like an electric current. Predator, acknowledging predator. The man didn't return after that day. The tourists saw nothing. They never do. The fire crackles, shadows deepening. The narrator leans back. The fire casting long shadows. The narrator leans forward. 3 months after Hale's return to duty, I received a visit from a man who gave no name. Thin, pale, with forgettable features suggesting professional anonymity. He found me in my study, uninvited itself, a message about capabilities and reach. "You've been asking questions about Guardsman Hale, about things that officially don't exist," he said, settling into my armchair. He spread photographs across my coffee table, surveillance shots from forbidden places. Hale at his post, but capturing details invisible to casual observers. Sightlines, strategic positions, fields of fire encompassing not just palace grounds but key locations throughout London. The Royal Guard serves 2 functions, he explained: ceremony for tourists, and protection, but not as most imagine. From his post, Agent Hale has oversight of 7 sniper positions, 3 vehicle routes, direct communication to 4 security agencies. He's not just standing guard, he's a human sensor in a protective network. The voice becomes heavy with implication, psychological conditioning that nearly cost Agent Hale his abilities. Intentional. Think about it, a man with his capabilities, standing in plain sight at the most photographed location in the world. Foreign intelligence services analyze those pictures daily, looking for weaknesses. He leaned forward. If they could see what he really was, his true nature visible in his posture, awareness, readiness, they would know our ceremonial guards are advanced operatives. The illusion would be shattered, protection compromised. The conditioning created guards who could hide in plain sight, whose capabilities were invisible even to professional observers. The trigger word is for emergencies only. When conventional security fails, the ceremonial guard becomes what he truly is, a last line of defense. As he gathered his photographs, erasing evidence with practiced efficiency, he paused. There are others, hidden guardians throughout London, wearing ceremony while carrying genuine protection. They sacrifice recognition, identity itself, to serve something larger. The fire crackles lower. The narrator's voice becomes deeply contemplative. In the weeks following that revelation, I returned to Buckingham Palace with new eyes. I began seeing the ceremonial guard as components in an invisible machine. Guardsman Mitchell at the north gate tracked a suspicious vehicle lingering in the restricted zone. His head never moved, expression never changed. Yet somehow the vehicle was surrounded by unmarked cars within minutes. Guardsman Roberts seemed to sense crowd disturbances before they became visible. I watched him shift weight 30 seconds before a pickpocket emerged, and was quietly apprehended by plainclothes officers. During a state visit by a Middle Eastern prince, Hale was positioned at what appeared routine ceremonial duty, but his location provided sightlines to 3 identified sniper hides and covered the exact motorcade route to Parliament. A long, meaningful silence. The most remarkable incident occurred during what the press later reported as a minor security alert, the discovery of an abandoned backpack near Westminster Bridge. The official story spoke of precautionary measures, routine procedures, nothing to concern the public. But I was watching from a distance when it happened, and I saw something the newspapers never reported. As the area around the suspicious package was being evacuated, I noticed movement among the ceremonial guards at their various posts. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would attract attention, but a subtle coordination that spoke of long practice and perfect timing. They were repositioning themselves, not abandoning their ceremonial duties, but adjusting their positions to create interlocking fields of observation and fire that covered every approach to the palace complex. Hale, I noticed, had moved to a position that seemed ceremonially appropriate, but gave him clear sightlines to both the suspected threat location and the evacuation routes being used by security personnel. His rifle, ostensibly decorated, was held in a grip that could transition to combat readiness in milliseconds. The narrator's voice becomes almost mystical when the bomb squad declared the package harmless, someone's forgotten gym bag, filled with nothing more dangerous than soiled workout clothes. The guards returned to their original positions with the same subtle coordination. The entire operation lasted less than 20 minutes, and most observers never realized it had happened at all. But for those 20 minutes, the ceremonial guard had transformed into something else entirely, a distributed early warning system, a network of human sensors capable of detecting, assessing, and responding to threats with a speed and sophistication that conventional security measures could never match. A pause filled with I began to understand then why the conditioning was so important, why men like Hale had to be trained to hide their true capabilities so thoroughly. In a world where every action is recorded, every gesture analyzed, every expression scrutinized by hostile intelligence services, the ability to appear harmless while remaining deadly was perhaps the most valuable skill a protector could possess. The tourists see red coats and bearskin hats, symbols of a bygone age when warfare was ceremonial and honor was more important than efficiency. They take pictures of living statues, remnants of imperial pageantry preserved for their amusement and nostalgia. They have no idea. They are photographing some of the most dangerous men in the world. The fire begins to die down, embers glowing in the growing darkness.